Um, Thank you so much. Whoa, darkness. Um, this is how dark it's gonna be? Okay. And I can't even see you guys now, so okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. Ad, thanks so much for that really kind and generous introduction. I want to say thanks to Emily at the Owens for being so supportive and collaborative through the whole process of this exhibition. To Ad and Chris, it's a great reunion, so I really am grateful, and to all of you guys for being here. I'm going to start by showing a number of works, as the lecture's called Recent Performance Works. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a history. So as a performance artist, I started as a dancer when I moved to Canada from Kenya, working as my parents were immigrants. We moved from Kenya to Canada, as I just mentioned. But thinking through that space, my parents didn't have a place for daycare for me. And so they found a free ballet class for immigrant kids, and that's how I started dancing. And so for them, it was a way for me to be, for daycare for me, and they knew that I was being taken care of. But I started to learn the technique, became very involved in it, and started to just dance. Dance became my subculture, and dance became my life. And through this, I also talk a lot about how dancers we have a very strange way of understanding our sense to our craft. And later on in my life, I stopped dancing partially because the ballet world, as I grew up, didn't like my body. My body is, specifically, they didn't like my feet, and I'll sort of talk about that. And foot fetish in ballet is very much a part of the aesthetics, the masochisms that is part of a ballet culture. And so a lot of my work kind of deals with that. So after I left the ballet world, I went into training in a Martha Graham school in Toronto, for anyone from Toronto, Toronto Dance Theatre Company. And there, ballet was seen as the civilized, the dance of the kings. Ballet began as a way to bow to Louis XIV. So it comes to this like pomp and circumstance of like what it means. And then, when I wasn't able to do it anymore because the ballet world was sort of rejecting me, it was like, go do modern dance. Modern dance gives an allowance for all types of bodies, and you'll do better there. So I went into the modern world and learning a whole new language, how to like move, how to articulate. But modern dance, specifically Graham technique, is also quite rigorous and pretty wicked as well. And in my senior year of my BFA, I did a dance degree at York University, dance and visual arts, I tore my hamstring. And so from that, I kind of had a mental, physical breakup with dance and moved on. And so that's kind of where I came into like my MFA at Western, where I met Chris and Ad, and I started thinking a lot through my post-colonial identity, my identity as a fifth-generation Kenyan, born and raised, immigrating to Canada. So I didn't talk about dance. I really focused a lot on the notions of souvenirs, artifacts, mask culture. And then years later, moving to New York, I started working with Yvonne Rainer at the Whitney program, and she kind of got me back into dance. So dance for me was always a really strange relationship. I still feel like we broke up, and now we're trying to be friends again. And so there's this kind of strangeness to it, and I found a way now that it is in my life. I'm not a trained dancer. I don't perform in a company, but we have found a way to meld and be something. And so I started to kind of come full circle with this work where I started thinking about the post-colonial body. So the narrative of dance through post-colonial histories and decolonial processes. And as we know, many objects in museums, especially African objects, have been removed from their place of origin and placed in the museum collection. And in that, we've taken away their bodies. So I always look at places of agency, the questions of visibility, invisibility, but all of these masquerades, come with masquerades. And so I've tried to reinstate the body to these objects. So this is a piece commissioned by the Seattle Art Museum called In Touch. And in Touch, part of this exhibition, my dance is unannounced. So if you're in the space and you happen to see it, it's part of that experience, but you don't necessarily see the performance. I also try to break down the etiquettes, the rules, the everyday choreography that is instilled in us that we may not even know of. So when we go to museums, we know we don't touch, we know we don't speak. So this dancer walks into the space unannounced and starts to look and starts to play and starts to just like observe objects. one of the rules of the Seattle Art Museum and many museums is that you can't point at objects. Pointing might instill a touch, and we can't touch the object. So as he walks around, looking at the objects, he then comes to this object and stares at it. And this is the kind of the beginning of the choreography. And he starts to point at the object. And we know through social etiquette, pointing is rude. So he kind of creates this confrontation between him and this object. But there's almost also a sincerity of like, where did you go? And so then he veils himself. So the costume becomes this kind of like veil. And in West African masquerade, once you're veiled, you're taken into another world. You're not in your body anymore, you're a different entity. And he dances the original masquerade dance that the object once embodied. And he also is using some of my choreography where he's trying to like use the object and put it on. But he can't get into the object's space because the museum apparatus of the plinth, a stand-in for the body, doesn't allow him to go there. So it becomes this dance where he circles the object, trying to put it on, and it almost becomes like an interruption in the space. And that, for me, is a playful space where he's changing the museum space. You don't necessarily expect to see performance in this way. He's asking you to like see some things in a different way, but that interruption is part of the tension that I'm trying to create in the work. So eventually he comes around and he bows to the object, unveils himself, and walks away. So it's not a moment of giving up. It's a kind of an acknowledgement that this is the social kind of structure. This is the hegemony within the space. So the piece is called In Touch, and it's this idea of, again, the pointing, that object. So sort of thinking about the social rules, but also how do we kind of challenge and change those rules. This is the object in the space after, because then he goes and he hangs it onto after he bows to the object, he hangs it onto a museum display and then leaves the space. Thinking about other projects, I look a lot at the ballet body reinstating the object. So this is a 4-channel film project, but it's also a photo series, and I kind of think about when objects are placed on pedestals, podiums, plinths, which become very much a part of my work. I think there's an elevation of the object becoming a commodity. So body on plinths, masks on plinths, there becomes this exchange. And in this work, the ballet body of the dancer becomes a hybrid. It's bowing to the object, it's acknowledging the object, it's apologizing to the object, but it's also giving it a body. And I kind of think about this idea of hybridity and of bringing two things together to make something new is a social political sort of strategy within my work. So here you have the dancer bowing, and they have this sense, the way I've staged them, to feel like they are, the studio of Picasso, or like this kind of like Stieglitz photograph. They're black and white, really, seductively staged images. So for the example here, Lorenz is bowing, but Grayson is, bending his body, and there's this idea that this becomes a body. So this kind of new kind of hybrid kind of space that these two objects are coming together to make something new. And this piece is called We as One. So in other strategies that I'm kind of moving through, I started to think a lot about collectivity, social solidarity. How do we make dance a political space? So I'm thinking through a lot through protest, of gathering, critical mass, of bodies coming together. And unison for me is something that's really important. How do we move together? When I was dancing ballet, the corps, which is the corps de ballet, which is the lowest ranked dancers, we all move together. We don't necessarily like touch each other, but we know how to move without touching at the same time. We also learn how to breathe at the same time with each other. So I think that that's such a poignant space of gathering and becoming one. So in my dances, I don't always make them do things like that. Sometimes I do, and there is a certain like rigor to the certain types of dancers I use for different projects. But this one here is called. It's called I'm Down, and it was a site-specific installation for Santa Monica, right outside of LA, where we were kind of thinking about this neighborhood that's being gentrified, where a new train system, above-ground train system, like will allow people to move from Santa Monica to downtown LA. And so we started to think about what is moving change. I came up with this slogan, and we kind of dressed up in T-shirts, and we had our placards, and we kind of marched, and we kind of moved, and we kind of mimicked the ways to move through a train. And we kind of, so the process of making the dance itself was like collaborative. I gave them motifs, and at first, because we also danced on the train, we were always moving. And the way you found us was that there was a text messaging system, and if you texted "I'm down," then we would send you little didactic kind of like Fluxus directives of how we were making gestures. But then the day before, we'd say, we're going to be at the Pico neighborhood train station, 18th Street, from this time to this time, now come. And then people would kind of gather that way. Or we'd start to just collect people as we were walking. So it's kind of like this kind of like social movement gathering. And people would ask us questions like, what is moving change? Or it just became this kind of social kind of space, and we were gathering. And so here are some of the gestures that we're doing. And one thing that was really funny, when I started working with them, I said, okay, like let's move like we're in the train. And I was like, we're gonna move like this. And they're like, why would we even be that? I'm like, well, the train's packed. And they're like, well, that's a New York train. Like, and the trains in LA, they're empty. And I was like, oh, okay. Because I was like so ingrained to think about how we would move in a train in New York. And then I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to move in a train in LA. So it was curious to kind of just have those kinds of experiences. But we would move through the space, and we were always like on the train, off the train. It was kind of ad hoc, kind of like guerrilla style. And then people would just kind of like start following us, which I loved, this kind of idea of participation and people just sort of gathering through the space. And then it also kind of always ended at this mural piece, which is still up in California, where it says, our days begin and end as stories in the main languages of the Pico neighborhood. And this is where the above ground train passes. So we always would end our protest dance here. So this is another, I'm just gonna go through a number of pieces, and then I'll sort of contextualize the whole kind of synergy of them and where I'm coming from. So another place of my work and my research is looking at the dance club. Living in New York for the past 15 years before I moved to Chicago, the nightclub dance space was a sanctuary, a place for freedom. Vogue culture was something that was a big thing for me. And I always think about, when I'm dancing in the club, I always feel invisible. And I feel there's a sense of power to that invisibility. You might see me being like dancing and giving spectacle, but in my mind, I don't see that. And so I'm always curious about those spaces. What is a safe space? What is a brave space? How am I seen? How am I heard? And I then started thinking about the dance floor itself, the physical dance floor. And when I work with dancers, I always try to give them agency, to talk about how does your body function in this space. When I was dancing, no one cared. So here I'm trying to give a space of agency. So how does this architectural device that supports our bodies, but also as we move on it, penetrates our bodies? So the kind of the residue of a floor. So when I'm working with my dancers, we always talk about the floor. How does the floor hit my body? What does my body feel like when I'm walking on it? And so I'm really aware of that in general, but I'm also really aware of it for my dancers, for their safety, for protecting them. And so I also realize that, when you fall, there's never a fall in dance, unless it's like a more spectacle kind of grand fall and you kind of like do something. So I started to work with an artist, dancer, Rachel Myers from Ballet BC, in a studio in Vancouver, and we just were rehearsing falling. How do we fall and make it and protect our bodies? And at the time, the Pulse Orlando massacre happened, which then really threw me off. This idea that a queer space was infiltrated and 49 people didn't leave the club. 49 people fell to the ground and didn't leave the club. So that notion of falling, the idea of the dance floor, all started to have a different sense of political questions of resistance, and through the concept of resistance, to finding freedoms and finding civil rights for people. And so I created this piece called Free Fall, and Free Fall became a dance party. I've started to make these political dance parties where we gather together. So for Free Fall, it was this at the Getty Center. I worked with 18 dancers, all on pedestals, kind of referencing back to Felix Gonzalez Torres and the go-go dancer. So my dancers are go-go dancers. They're dancing on these platforms. This is a free Friday, and the museum had, at the end of the performance was 5,000 people, And I worked with a friend, a collaborating DJ. This time it was a good friend named How to Dress Well, a musician based out of LA. And we created a dance party. And in the dance party, we perform, we dance, people gather, people are invited. But we stop the music 49 times. And there's a sound cue that kind of gives the dancers a cue, and then they all fall to the ground, and we have this moment of silence. And it's always kind of strange to see what happens the first time, because the first time people just started to clap, and then there was like awkward laughter. But eventually, we have a board that's, a scoreboard that's showing, counting down the numbers. And people started to learn the choreography, the cue. They took the cue on. And at the end of the night, these are earlier on in the evening, but at the end of the night, we had all 5,000 people just falling to the ground, and we had a carpet of people all laying there. And it was such a powerful moment, but also like a really like tentative, scary moment, because it was like, okay, like we're all laying here. Like what if something happens? It was just this moment, but again, this idea that people came together, people were all sort of supporting each other. And at the end, after the 49th, we all fell, we all stood up, and we started to dance. So a big part of this piece is that we stand up again. We can fall, but we also have to stand up again. And for me, that's also a metaphor for me within my own career as a dancer, to kind of be empowered. We have civil rights to still think through and are in need for, but we stand up. So they fall 49 times. We have 49 moments of silence, but it's an acknowledgement, but it's also a moment to be empowered to move forward. So even within the language of dance, to move forward is a big part of what I think through. This is another piece called Clean Labor. So another part of my work is looking at the space of labor within our moving bodies. Dancers, there's always a periphery between where we see them and how from the stage to, you don't see the dancer breathe, you can't hear them breathe, you don't see them sweat. So I really kind of want to talk about our labor. I think we dehumanize dancers when they're on stage, because the acts of fortitude become acts of just, it seems effortless, but there's a lot of pain, pleasure as well, but there's this sense of invisible labor. So this is a piece called Clean Labor, where my dancers work in collaboration with a team of cleaning staff at a hotel. And it was a lot of conversations about what do you do, how do you clean a room, because the way you clean a hotel room has a choreography of how it's done. And at the end is this utilitarian purpose to clean, but also hotel rooms, you can never show that a body has been inside that space. So even working with the cleaners, they were like, we can't show wrinkles on the bed, because if there's wrinkles on the bed, that means a body has touched that space. So you can't show that there's been someone in that space. And so we started to think about how to clean it. We kind of made a score, and then together they started to clean the rooms. There's also a really beautiful intimacy between the two. We started to teach the cleaning staff how to stretch their bodies, because they don't do that kind of conditioning. We were asking them where do you feel pain, and it became a really beautiful exchange. So we learned the dance together, and then I opened up. We had 5 hotel rooms in this hotel, and we opened it up to an audience, and we watched the dancer and the cleaning staff perform, and at the end clean this room. And then one part in this piece, there's a moment where the dancer will put their hand on the chest of the cleaning staff, and they're supposed to stop moving and just stay there, and then the dancer would kind of continue doing the work. And that was one of the hardest things for the cleaning staff, because they said, I don't want to stop. We're not allowed to stop. Stopping is really, is not allowed. And so I really think about stillness in my work as a political gesture as well, one that we're still activated, but it's not being idle. I think in capitalist society, we need to be effective, we need to be constantly in action. So I also think about how do we stop, even for a moment of contemplation, to self-check, to self-care within those spaces, but we're still active. So I really want to put that forward, and that was a really hard thing for the cleaning staff to take on. This is a piece called Steady Pulse. So coming from free fall, there's a really interesting space in New York, and for you guys going to New York, maybe check it out. It's called Recess. Recess is a non-for-profit organization, and they used to have a storefront in Soho, so right in the middle of Soho, and they asked me to take on the storefront and make a dance piece for the entire 3 months of the summer. So I was still under the, thinking about Pulse Orlando. So this is called Steady Pulse. And I started to think a lot about, body indexes through commercial ideas of like, coat hangers being something that, a body clothing hangs on, thinking through the coat check. 49 coats didn't leave the club at Pulse Orlando. So we kind of made this space. And again, think about the dance floor. The space becomes a transitional space. It becomes a space to gather and dance. It becomes a space to make a dance party. It became a space to have conversations. We had a whole talk series there. It was a space to just like come and work. And also the dance itself was made in process. There was never like a beginning or an end. So we made the dance together. Then when we finally like kind of learned it and they had it in their bodies, they would just do it. But it was always changing. So in the space, we had these boards, which are the dance floor. I worked with this architect to kind of create this kind of like sponge-like support so that there's more resistance, so they could actually feel and dance on them for longer, because this floor was really hard. And so every day when the dancers came in, they would reorganize the space. So it could become a place, it could become a pedestal, it could be a place for a platform, and they would change the space, and then they would have to interact in it. And it was like for 3 hours they would kind of move. If a dancer wasn't there, the costume still hung, and it became a thing that they would fold. So a lot of the kind of the choreography came through ideas of nurture and care. There was this idea also that they would also speak to each other through a Morse code pattern. So they would send each other patterns of like, tapping back and forth to kind of call back. So a game of call and response, basically. And at one point in the process, like, Khadija here was like, she's like, I'm trying to call them, but they can't hear me. And I was like, and that's okay, because sometimes we're not heard. There's that action that we want to always be heard, and I get that, but sometimes we're not heard. 49 people in the Pulse Orlando massacre were not heard. So we played this game of call and response through a Morse code pattern through the dance. And when they would gather, they would kind of create actions where they would move in solidarity, in mirroring each other, or they would just lay with each other and kind of like, gather and support each other. So there was this really interesting aspect of this piece. When they did come in and they rearranged the space, they always started because they had like a sound system behind these boards. They always started out with the song by the Whispers, The Beat Goes On. So that kind of like disco kind of like idea of the beat meaning the violence continues, the beat meaning the pulse of the heart beats. So kind of playing with this idea that the beat goes on. So that's where they always would start, and they would end with that song. So it became, and sometimes, they really pushed the limits, and it was like kind of amazing what it became throughout the whole process. And we did it for 3 months, so it was like constantly, it was like for like days, it kind of had this ongoing. It was also interesting because people just assumed Soho, clothing store, so people thought it was like this like really strange like chic boutique with like one outfit, and then people would kind of be like, what's happening in here? And I was like, then they would kind of experience this dance, like it was, or sometimes they would just stay still, and these kids came in and they're like, these mannequins look really real, and then they started dancing, and then the kids screamed and ran out. So there were some really amazing moments in this whole thing. And again, I like to work with graphic design. A lot of my work, all of the works probably have some kind of like graphic poster. This is this was part of Steady Pulse. Also, this saying here, I'm old enough to know what we lost, comes from when I was doing research for the I'm Down project. There was a dance floor in a dance studio in Santa Monica where during the AIDS crisis, a lot of performers, dancers, actors were dying, and so they made the dance floor a space of acknowledgement where they would write down people's names or just sentiments, and that space became really important for me. And that's this exact handwriting, I took it from a picture. Someone wrote, "I'm old enough to know what we lost," and that was something that's sort of become like a kind of a footnote within a lot of my work around these notions. Here's another piece. So I do this thing, when you're on the dance floor, what song makes you feel free? It's become a poster project, but then we kind of collectively collect all the songs that people write, the song that makes them feel free on the dance floor, they acknowledge with their name, and it becomes a playlist that we send out. So that's something else that we do. Last year for Nuit Blanche, I did a version of the dance party called On Flashing Lights. Toronto was having a lot of, its queer POC community was having a lot of issues with the police. I'm always questioning who is protecting my body, who's thinking to protect my body, who does not see my body. And the police were not seeing many people's bodies. And so I worked with a number of Toronto's queer DJs to create a dance set for the 12 hours. And we hired 25 cars outfitted with sirens to mimic police cars. And so here we had this cavalcade of police cars, and then we had the DJ set, and we made a dance party where we danced together. We attracted 10,000 people, and we danced to the sirens of the police cars. So the police cars became the animation for the disco. So it was a sense of emergency, this idea of urgency, but it became a gathering, which was really important. And also, it was right outside of City Hall, so it was like this kind of really perfect site to make this dance party. Ad had mentioned that I just was part of the Whitney Biennial, and the piece of the Whitney Biennial was called Master and Form. So another side of my work is looking at the masochism, the pain, the pleasure, the fetishized body that we do, and I say we because this is how we facilitate or manipulate our bodies. Ballet is a very structured form of dance. There's only one way to do it, and these are things that I'm challenging. As I have been put outside of the ballet world, I can be critical of it, but it's still hard for the ballet world to see what I do as being, it's tentative and it's difficult. So the Master and Form became a piece looking at the mastery of the form of ballet, but also how do we enact and take care of our bodies within the space. So basically what I've been doing is creating these kinds of what I'm calling BDSM playgrounds that support but also burden the body of the dancer. This device here is called the cage. It's an austere, wicked, daunting sort of object, but it's really the space where the dancer gets to break free from the dance that I give them, and they can stretch and relax and do different things. But what I've also been doing is creating these devices. So when I was a young boy dancing ballet, as I said, they didn't like my feet. So I used to use these wooden devices to bind my feet in to give me arches. And many dancers use them when you're younger, because when you're younger, your feet can be manipulated more, bones can move. It sounds disgusting, but true. So I started to think about that device, and so I started making full body devices. Full body devices that look like, sort of like kind of medieval torture tools. They have a wickedness to them, but they support the dancers, but it also burdens the dancers because it makes them hold a position longer. So there's 5 in total, but each has a different position. So this is called, I call it swan dive. It has a longer French name, but swan dive is what you do in Swan Lake. So the dancer will stand up. Wherever the body touches, there's a leather connection, so skin to skin. So there's this kind of weird perversity where I call it furniture intimacy. There's this kind of weird intimacy between the dancer's body and the object. And so they kind of in tandem work and support each other. This is second position. Second position was interesting because I made it and so that it could rotate to 360 degrees, but these dancers all go past. So then we had to rechange the structure so that it could still be like a burden, not that it was easy. And there was this also for me was dancers right now are so engineered in such a weird way. We are athletes, but the way we're engineered is they just do things so it's just different than when I was dancing, which was also kind of scary to kind of see. And then it was taken to the Whitney Biennial, and at the Whitney we kind of changed it in terms of amping it up. The cage becomes this larger device, and the dancers perform in it. We created a very intense score. So we performed it, I found out recently, 100 times during the run of the biennial. So we did it 100 times, and each time it was performed was 5 hours. So it's these long endurances. So endurance is a part of my work, and I'm bringing it up now, but a lot of what we do is always part of an endurance. This is Hector working in 5th position in first. This is the device. and this is probably when he's coming out of position to kind of stretch and relax. The cage becomes a space to find their moments, but there's also motifs of mimicking, mirroring each other. And for me, it was very much about giving, again, still space of agency. Under these kind of like torturous kind of constraints, they find freedom within their own gesture to take on. And that was really difficult because ballet dancers don't take that on. So for me, like I kept on saying to them, like, you have choice. You can do this. This is 5 hours. What are you going to do to give yourself a break within this? And one of them said to me, this is Violetta, she said to me, like, can I take off my point shoes? And I said, yeah. You know, like dancing 5 hours in point is grueling. And there's always like a 20-minute break in between certain sections when they're not there. And she came back after that 20-minute break, and she's still in point shoes. So afterwards, I was like, why didn't you take off your point shoes? She's like, well, I know you told me I could, but I didn't want to dance in soft shoe. So there's this kind of like those masochisms of like, you know, you have the freedom, and so I'm really pushing with the ballet dancers to take on those freedoms, but it's been a real challenge. Like even with this, I had to score and choreograph every second because we had to know what was going to happen, because improvisation isn't a ballet dancer's strength. They have other strengths in other ways. So it was really a moment of exploration. We also had 5 dancers always in performance, but we had a cast of 15. So we always had to rotate because we did it Friday, Saturday, Sunday for 5 hours. Bodies are tired, so we had to rotate people in. So this is the production of the whole thing. Yeah, Amy's giving real face here because that's probably how she's feeling right now in this moment. So I've been thinking about like finding freedom through restraints, the kind of ideas. This is a piece I did at the Guggenheim, but I'm also like fully fleshing it out as a full choreography that will become a larger dance. But how, when we're bound or if we're in some form of restraint, how do I find freedom in that? How do we find new movements? And so if a dancer's leg is tied up, you know, they don't have to think about the strength or fortitude to keep it up there. They now can find different ways of moving. If you're tied and bound together, how do you move? So I started doing this piece working with rope masters, Jabari rope bondage masters, to tie up dancers to find ways to make new movements. So it became part of this party, it was part of the the Guggenheim's gala, but it's becoming a way where I'm just like, I'm tying up dancers and watching them move and making new gestures, new ways of kind of creating choreography. But for me, there's this notion of like, how do we find freedom within the restraint? And within that too, you know, ballet has that questions of restraint, point shoes, the ideas of freedom, like where do we find them? When I talk to the dancers, you know, when they dance, they're all professional dancers, they'll use, when they're on stage at the Met, because some of them dance from American Ballet Theater or New York City Ballet, they will need 10 pairs of shoes a week. And so I've been thinking about this idea of ballet kink and the kink of ballet within it, you know, the pains, the pleasures, the freedoms, the restraints, but also how it's an imposed, you take it on. We put it on ourselves. We can stop at any time, but we don't stop. And I kind of think about that through post-colonialism, where those histories of violence were put on people. This is something that we take on. And it's you know, we may not want to admit to it, but it's still something that's part of that space. This is my solo at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, again thinking about games, children's games, call and response, hide and seek, follow the leader, as strategies to think politically through. This became a space, this is my sculpture that kind of fits into the staircase that became a platform for the dancers to kind of stand and make monument on. I really think about the language of dance. We had a lot of like calls to respond. The piece was called a call and response. And what we could do, again, it was a text message score. If you texted, I want to play to 900, 900, you'd get different score chunks. So this is one of the wall pieces, a call to respond, calling you to move, create a public action, hiding and seeking in movements, we want to we. And sometimes we would send these things out and just gather people, and then we would kind of come into the space and make something with a group of the general public. But then my dancers would kind of dance in the space, and they had a certain number of games that they had to play. So here they are. So again, if you notice, I kind of have these jumpsuits a lot. So this is another collaboration with the Rational Dress Society, which is a collective in Chicago. They're amazing. So the Rational Dress Society is a group of artists that make jumpsuits. They have, I think, 150 different patterns, all free online. So you can make a jumpsuit that fits to your body. But they collaborate with me to do different ones for my different performances. So if you wanted to text, so I'm always interested in how do we disseminate dance in other ways. So if you want to play, you could send text messages and you'd get these. I want to play welcome to a call and response. Your first prompt is stop and hide in your shadow. Text move for more prompts. And so it just kind of became this ongoing kind of thing. So you could kind of, you could be part of it as well by getting the texts. This is my piece at the Noguchi. I'll kind of speed up a little bit. So after the Master in Form was looking at my life as ballet dancer, this is looking at my life through Martha Graham and her collaborations with Noguchi. Noguchi's work always influenced me, even with the devices for the Master in Form, but always, I like his hybridity. So we started to have more of an intervention in the space of the Noguchi, where my scaffolding becomes shelving, my scaffolding becomes places for Noguchis to exist in. This chair here is part of a prop for a dance performance that Martha Graham choreographed called Appalachian Spring. And for Appalachian Spring, it was a two-dimensional chair. It didn't rock. It was meant to be a rocking chair, and Martha Graham would sit on it. So I worked with a furniture designer to create versions of the chair. The chair was based on a West African, so coming full circle, market stool. And I worked with this, they're solid walnut. They are really heavy, but they become these kind of, again, new devices for the dancers to work in. There's 6 of them, and they're placed, and similar to the ones downstairs here, they come from the same sort of ways of thinking. I wanted this kind of rocking chair to have a sense of giving the body a contemplative notion. Like for the dancers here, they work with, and I think Megan's here. I think I saw her. There you are. Thank you. This idea when you're rocking, there's this idea of being contemplative in your space, but it can also be read as being like a sense of like madness. And so we kind of play with that in our piece downstairs, the Rite. But for the Martha Graham piece, I want them to do acts of endurance, so similar acts. So the whole notion of Graham technique is that you contract your muscles, and when you release, you have the action. And so they have to sit in a position where I tore my hamstring in, which is called pleating, and they have to hold the contraction so deep and not let the chair rock. So the chair that once was not able to rock, I've made it rock, and now their challenge or task within the choreography is to hold it still. And then there's moments when they're just kind of in display. So I also want to think a lot about, and there's a new article coming out about how my work functions as prop, but also is art object. So there's moments like even at the Whitney, my dancers could touch the objects while in performance mode, but as soon as that performance ended, it is art object. So I've been dealing with this whole kind of question, and something that Noguchi also dealt with. So even when the dancers, there was a question about insurance, like how does the dancer, if the dancer breaks the chair in a performance, we'll cover it, but if it breaks at another time, we can't. So it was just bureaucracies. But it's interesting how it oscillates. I talk about hybridity, but my objects also are hybrid in the sense that they're prop, they're art object, they're furniture, and so I kind of like that idea. So here's more of the show. There's another section of the dance where they have to make Noguchi sculptures, and they become Noguchi sculptures. All of these sculptures are called assembly pieces. They're made out of slate. So they're these big pieces of stone. The installation team have to rehearse how to put them together with the wooden maquettes because the slate can just snap. And so I started to teach my dancers how to make them. So they'll do moments where they'll start to kind of build the Noguchis in this kind of like playground space, but then they'll also kind of just hold them sometimes. and become new Noguchis, and they're all based on dancers' forms. So you can see here some of his drawings. They're all based on dancers' forms. So this is up now in New York. It's performed every Saturday from now until March 4th, from 1 till 3 at the Noguchi. And I'm very grateful to my dancers always, because they give me, so much. That's that position. It's a version of it. The costume, and then they always end the dance on Noguchi's sculpture called play sculpture, which they just kind of love because it's like this big ergonomic kind of like metal thing, which just allows them to release. So they always finish on play sculpture. I'm going to go a little bit faster because I think we're running out of time, and I think there'll be some questions. So Freefall, the piece about Pulse Orlando, I was lucky to get a New Chapters grant, and I made a film called Freefall. And Freefall for camera, sorry. So a la Mars Cunningham, when he made his films, he always said, for camera. So this is Freefall for camera, and it becomes a piece thinking about Busby Berkeley's fallen bodies, the glamorized bodies through Hollywood film, when they would fall and make those kaleidoscopic gestures. So this is Freefall. And I just finished the piece, and I'm really proud of it. And it's a piece that kind of extends that queer space of of empowerment. They kind of stand and fall, but they support and take care of each other. And that's really important for me in this film. There's moments where I bring back the Vogue ball scene into it. We create amazing dance patterns. And then there's moments of, the siren, the police siren, the lights, the kind of look. So everything was filmed from above for a large section of it. So we got these really amazing moments. And here they would kind of like fall to the ground and then create this kaleidoscopic action and then stand up again and support each other. Yeah. So that's it for now. Yeah, my dancers always come, like I have we're like dance like community in that way that we all know each other. So when I'm working in different cities, I feel like I just have dance community in Toronto, New York, and Chicago and LA. So it's just like it's just there. But like when I go to other spaces, like I'll ask a dancer, like I need dancers in Montreal, and then we just kind of all like network with each other. Sometimes I work with companies, like when I work with ballet dancers, I need them to be like technically trained, like just those minute details are like, I need them to be trained. So they come from like National Ballet of Canada or Joffrey Ballet or New York City Ballet or, some kind of company. But again, we're still all like networks. We're all just like, just kind of like talking to each other. I always get embarrassed because I'm like, I'm not a dancer anymore. They're like, but you are. And I'm like, it's like, so it's like, it's a big, but it's, yeah, we just know each other. Yeah. So with this show in particular, the music it's from the Rite of Spring, and specifically Nijinsky's The Rite of Spring. And Nijinsky, in terms of a ballet choreographer, was looking at those actions of Tourette's, of like kind of things that didn't feel like in a ballet vocabulary. So the things that made a body seem othered was what he was doing in his choreography. So that's specifically why I took his Rite of Spring. And so a lot of the gestures that the dancers do come from that. The chair allows for that kind of contemplation to rock, but as I said, it also is an other action. So playing with that, and so the sound is from the Rite of Spring, but I've re-edited it to become something that feels a little bit like, again, playing with editing to kind of jump back and forth, repetition. So repetition is something that comes a lot in this piece where they have to do things over and over and over. And as dancers, we do that all the time. That's how we learn to take the dance into our body and then express it, but it's also a way to fatigue our bodies. So I use repetition for different ways, but in this piece, it's to kind of show something that happens again and again as a form of being othered. I think I answered your question, right? Oh, the construction of the cage. The cage, I apologize. I always collaborate with an architectural firm called Norman and Kelly, and we work together. I sometimes am hot gluing like pieces of like toothpicks, and I'm like, I want to build this, and then we like take it and we make it. So, but the cage for me, becomes it's very aesthetic, in terms of the lines. They also are lines that the dancers will mimic. So because when we're dancing, we always try to think about our spines, our lines, our alignments. So it's something to kind of also give the dancers a way to mime, but it's also an pure aesthetic decision. So yeah, like literally I'll be like making something with toothpicks, and then I'm like, let's make this now. Yeah, my drawing, sometimes I'm really embarrassed to show it to him, and he's like, you're such a good drawer. And I'm like, thanks, I don't know about that one. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. For me, in the beginning, I was very against being in my work. This is like starting when I was doing more performance stuff. It was always about endurance. And I always think about like my authority in my work, because, when I was a dancer, I was always told how to move. People told me how to move my body. Now I'm telling people how to move their bodies. That's a really, that's a really intimate, intense thing to do. And I'm still uncomfortable with it. But I did a piece that was sort of like, I didn't talk about it. It's called Standing Leg, where I put on my foot stretcher and I try to stand up with it. It's an endurance performance piece. It's super painful. I only done it twice. There's a video documentation. That's how it's going to live. But it gave me the way to understand, like, okay, you don't have to do this anymore. So I feel like in my work, I found a collaboration where I'm still dancing, but in a different way. And my dancers and I, we always are in contact. We're always in touch. And even though I'm not like on stage with them, I'm performing. Like I'm having anxieties. I'm like watching. Like even like at the Whitney for a while, like I had to like take myself away from it because it just was. I'm still in it. Like I may not be like dancing like they are dancing, but I'm still in a process, and so I still feel there's that way. So I'm finding that there's new ways to do things. So I said, like, I'm not a dancer. I am a dancer still. So yeah, but it's definitely. I don't think I will put myself physically to dance again, like in a work. I think I found it with my working with other dancers. Really complex. And the thing is, like, I always tell my dancers, like, you have to get paid, because if we don't get paid, we set a precedent that our labor is not valuable. So we have to, and as artists, we need to do the same thing too. So I advocate, and we won't dance if we don't get paid. And I have a set amount that my dancers should get paid. Like, I know Carfax fee for dancers is $20 an hour, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. We need to pay way over, because the labor, the endurance that dancers take on, it's really intense. So for the Whitney, we had to, there's a lot of performances, we had to fundraise. And I said, and no one ever questioned that they wouldn't get paid, it was just like, we're gonna do this is how we're gonna do it. So that was really important. But yeah, my dancers will always get paid. If a work, there's like there's an article in the New York Times about how dancers get paid, and how some visual artists that work within dance, we're creating like a system so that if the piece gets performed a number of years from now, how we can keep up within a union standard, even though we don't have that support, especially in the United States. So yeah, there has to be that question, and it's always a thing, because people for some reason believe that performance is cheap, and it's not. Or people are like, oh, you can just make me a new performance. And I'm like, no, you need the time, you need the space, and you need the finances. So, and within the Whitney, like, this gig became a livelihood for 15 dancers. So it was really important. The work is a living work. So, and I try to really acknowledge that and make that like aware always. Yeah, and so my installations, like, are oscillate again in the space that they're performance spaces, but then they're also like art installations. So at the Whitney, we performed it 3 times a week, but then we also had days when there was no dancers. The days where there was no dancers, there was a sound component that kind of had the residue of their bodies as they were moving through the space. You could feel a sense of bodies. But these objects, are sculptures. They also get purchased. So when they go into private collections, they come with a dance and a dance score. They all come with like video. So if someone who buys it wants, they can mount the performance. I'm also always, part of that process. So it's weird because I also like think about. Yeah, it's a weird space because like institutions are buying these things, and I have to think about how does the living body also still activate it. And so it comes with the dance, it comes with the score, but they're that weird thing that they're sculpture, they're commodity, and they're prop. Like it's a thing that I'm really like thinking a lot through, especially post Whitney, because like the whole installation from the Whitney is now in a private collection, and I have to like think about its archival like resonance and how it's going to be reperformed. So reperformance also is something that's really important. And so I've been talking to people like Yvonne Rayner, who's like, I don't perform anymore, but I have my transmitters that transmit these things. So all this kind of like, everyone has their own way of doing it. So I'm trying to find my way of doing it, which is something that I am now in a place to think about. But yeah, they definitely are different things. And so like when you go to the Noguchi, like you won't see the performance, but you'll see the installation. And sometimes I feel like, I love being non-defined. That's always my thing. But sometimes it's kind of like frustrating. There's strategies that I do where I make trajectories where I know how people will move in it because the way I've placed things. They will never touch an object because it'll be just the kind of social etiquette. But as soon as there's a performance, the audience makes a stage. We create like, so, and then I also instruct my dancers to sometimes like, confront the audience. So if they come closer to you, and they're like, and the people start to move. So I kind of use my dancers as ways of kind of manipulating the audience as well. But like, as soon as the dancers leave, it automatically becomes like art installation, and we view it the way our social etiquettes of museums, have told us to move. But as soon as dancers come in, we build stage. So two kind of like Western pivots sort of just become ingrained. And so I use my dancers to become ways to kind of break that. Yeah. It's all lived experience too. So what I do is part of a lived experience. So the third chapter of Master and Form will be at the San Francisco Asian Art Museum, where I'm just looking at the kink side of this, the kind of fetishization through kink, through rope bondage. So that's where that whole kind of piece will be coming out of, like binding dancers to find freedoms within those restraints. But we're also collaborating with the community, the kink community in San Francisco, and the collaborator is Midori, who's a sex worker and a sex educator in the community, who is going to be working with me and the dancers from Lions Ballet. I think they meld with each other. I think that there's a sense that even like ballet, for example, is seen as this romanticized, beautiful form of of an art, but it's actually quite wicked, torturous. We don't actually. So that's the kind of like the veil of the ballet world. Like everyone says like in my work, well, that's not us, and I'm like, but it is us. And I can be more critical because I'm out of it, but I'm in it. My friends, when I watch dance, still I only watch feet because I just have a foot fetish. I never had beautiful feet, so I want to see those beautiful feet. So there's that, and I think that the veils of beauty also change the kind of ways of the wickedness. Ballet is super rigorous, and also in the most amazing ways. I think my dedication to just the way I am as an artist comes from the rules and rigors that I learned as a young boy dancing, you know? So there's that kind of like institution that's still built in you. Oh yeah, no, that's an amazing, especially in consideration with our show, for sure, yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you so much.